You know, guys, I remember when these headlines used to be the norm, right? When things like this used to be the norm, games like this used to be the norm. We used to get this all the time. And now it just seems like conversations like this, unfortunately, are not the norm anymore because a lot of video games are just trying to do everything they can to put some message in your face because that's all they care about. The message is more important than the gameplay that's being shown on screen. Well, apparently the Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2 developer doesn't agree with that, and it's going to explain to us why so many AAA video games are failing in today's market.
You can't keep getting away with it!
Now, anybody who's been part of the conversation should know by now why AAA games are failing miserably. And no, it's not just because of wokeness and DEI. There's a lot of practices that are happening in the AAA gaming scene right now that are completely ruining the experience for the gamer, which is what it's supposed to be about in the first place. If you give gamers what they want, they will reward you with their money. Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2 is exactly a prime example of that. Dragon Ball Sparking Zero is another example of that, right? Black Myth Wukong is another example of that. There's so many examples out there. Even Baldur's Gate 3, yes, even Baldur's Gate 3 is another example. If you just give the gamers what they freaking want, you will get their money. Unfortunately, you have a lot of executives in the AAA gaming scene that are completely disconnected with the fan bases they're trying to sell video games to. And what ends up happening is they end up ruining any chance they have of making a profit because they piss off the gamer before the game even comes close to coming out. So let's get into this article, guys, from That Park Place. But of course, before we do, if you are new here, just consider hitting that subscribe button. I would greatly appreciate it, and like the video to push this out into that YouTube algorithm. Now, just to preface, I played Space Marine 2, streamed it, loved it, beat it. Very sad that the campaign is super short. I'm very unhappy about that. But overall, the game was awesome, a lot of fun, and it's a callback to what made games great in the first place. Saber Interactive's chief creative officer, so this is not someone small, Tim Willitis, shared his thoughts on why so many AAA video game developers are failing. Speaking to IGN, Willitis first rejected the idea that gamers were moving on from certain genres. He informed the outlet, "It is not necessarily the genre that has moved on, because great games will always do well." I agree with that. That's what I said in the beginning. Next, he shared one of the core beliefs at Saber that he believes allows the company to succeed again and again. One of the things that we try to do at Saber, and this is part of my job as creative officer of all the teams, we have a core belief that what you do every second and what happens when you push these buttons, and that core gameplay loop is so critical. So we focus on the moment-to-moment interaction in the gameplay and the feeling you have. And then we adhere to our core pillars, like be the ultimate Space Marine, melee, range, swarms. That's it. Willitis added. And you know what? Listen, that's literally what Space Marine 2 is. Space Marine 2 has a very addictive but simple gameplay loop, right? And it makes it interesting to follow the game's narrative, right? They're trying to tell you a story based within a very simplistic gameplay loop, and it keeps you engaged the entire way through, right? It's super fucking fun to play that game, and that's why a lot of people enjoy it, right? So it's something that a lot of developers, unfortunately, are lacking, because the problem is they're so focused on whatever their message is that they can't focus on the actual gameplay or the gameplay loop or keeping gamers engaged. Let's be real. Most of them don't give a shit about keeping gamers engaged. That's not what's on their priority list. They will flat out tell you this on their Twitter feeds. Most of them hate gamers. They actively tell you. So why would someone who hates gamers try to make something that's interesting that's going to make gamers, specifically gamers, want to keep playing the game? They're not trying to do that. They're making games for themselves. They're making games for their peers. They're making games for their echo chamber. And they're making games for their ESG investors. That's what a lot of them are doing, unfortunately, these days. He then returned to what he sees as mistakes other than that other developers make that lead to their demise, and a lot of teams throughout development would overscope games. They look at some other game that just came out and say, "Oh, we got to do that. Let's add this. We got to do this." And then they lose focus on the core. What actually makes the game fun, he explained. I think that a lot of live service games suffer with this issue. Live service games, see, here's the problem. A lot of developers, they'll look at other successful live service games, right? They'll look at Fortnite. They're always looking at games like Fortnite, Call of Duty, whatever, and they think, "Oh, we could just do that and just add our own spin to it, and we'll get the same amount of players they have. Let's do it, and let's invest all this money into it, and clearly it's going to work. And then it almost never works because they don't actually understand what makes those particular games good, right? Because they're not looking at the core of what makes those games tick and how they're so good for a lot of the people who are playing those games, but also just overall, the amount of money that they're spending for the investment, for the return that they're going to get is never going to match, because you're not going to get the Fortnite numbers. If you want to get Fortnite numbers, you got to make Fortnite, right? That's the entire reason why Fortnite has those numbers, because people have decided that that's their game that they're going to play, and they've been playing for a long fucking time. You think they're going to go leave to go play your similar Fortnite game? No, they're just going to stick to Fortnite, and let's keep playing that game. Then it says, instead, he shared that Space Marine 2 developers and Saber focus on the basics. We are not in Space Marine 2 doing things that, well, the swarms are new technology, but there isn't some revolutionary new gameplay mechanic that no one's ever seen before. There are gameplay mechanics that people are familiar with, but we do it really, really well, and we execute really, really well, he stated. And that's a fact. Exactly. You don't have to change the mold, right? There are certain gameplay aspects that are popular for a reason. All you got to do is take that aspect, take that gameplay loop, and do it better than everybody else, right? Do it and execute it better than everybody else and execute it strong. That's really all you got to do, right? The problem is that when people try to copy games like Fortnite or Space Marine 2, they try to do some weird shit. Half the time they try to, if they're not pushing an agenda, they'll try to put some weird gameplay decisions that a lot of people are like, why'd you do that? And it turns people off completely from playing the game. Then it says he also noted that Saber was able to keep its costs down on Space Marine 2. He told IGN, we really don't need to sell 4 million units to make Space Marine 2 a success. However, this is not the case for many developers. There are many, many games, sadly, especially out of North American developers, where if you do not sell 5 million copies, you are a failure. I mean, what business are we in where you fail if you sell less than 5 million? Well, that's the problem. We are in an over-bloated game industry. We have way too much in terms of our budgets because we are hiring these DEI fucking activist hires that don't do absolutely anything for the company, and they get carried by people who actually know how to do the job. There's an insane amount of bloat, and even with all the firing that's been happening in the gaming industry right now, it's quite simply not enough. There is so many positions that are just absolutely wasted that have no reason to exist, and yet they exist because they have to be, right? They exist either for ideological reasons or they exist in order for these companies to maintain the requirements for their ESG loans. That has to be there in order for them to continue to get their benefits. So at the end of the day, you're going to have to deal with the bloat. And with bloat comes high budgets that don't have to be that high in the first place. Saber was smart and kept their costs down. And this is something I say all the time. If you want to make woke video games, go ahead. You have every right to do that. It's a free market, right? But the market has spoken. Most woke games are going to fail. They're going to fail drastically, especially if the message takes precedence over the story and what's actually happening in the game. That's where a game gets woke for me personally, when the message takes precedence over anything that's happening gameplay-wise. If that's the case, you can do that, but I hope that you're smart enough to keep your budget down. If you kept your budget down to the point where you don't got to sell a lot in order to break even or make money, awesome. Then you could do whatever the fuck you want. But if you're spending 150, 250 million fucking dollars and you're putting out games that have a clear message to it, and then you're telling gamers that you hate them online, and you're saying if you don't like it, don't buy it, and you're doing all these things that are inherently bad for business, I mean, what are we doing at this point? So I'm glad that this person over at Saber, who happens to be a higher up position, I'm glad he spoke out against this stuff. I'm glad he's saying what makes them successful. And I think that a lot of AAA studios need to follow their example. I think they're setting a great example. And again, you can do something more ambitious. Just make sure you stick to your core values, which should be entertaining gamers first and keeping them interested from beginning to end. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Hope you did enjoy it. If you did, consider leaving me a subscribe. I would greatly appreciate if you get to like the video, comment, let me know what you thought, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Hypnotic out.